Liz Truss will go head-to-head with Rishi Sunak in the race to become Britain's next Prime Minister. Sunak, who came first in every voting round, won the support of 137 MPs in the latest round of voting, followed by Truss on 113. Penny Mordaunt, the Trade Minister, who was in second place until the final vote, was eliminated. Although Sunak has received the biggest vote among MPs, Truss is considered the favourite to win the contest based on her popularity with party members.
Arise business analyst Micheal Wilson joins us now on Newsday for more on these stories. Thanks for joining us, Micheal. The European Central Bank has just increased their interest rate for the first time in 11 years. Could you tell us more about that?
It is quite an historic moment, and what they're trying to face is hugely rising inflation with the whole of the Eurozone. So they raised it much more than expected. It was just to be about 0.25%. Now it is, in fact, 0.5%, which brings the actual rate of on the deposit account to 0%. However, it's seen as the beginning of the ECB actually getting to grips with inflation within the area. Most interestingly, I think, is the new mechanism which they're going to put in place, which will make sure that these monetary movements don't actually hurt some of the economies that are at their nascent stage rather than their developed stage. I think that's what's rather important, but certainly this is a big move as far as the ECB is concerned, and I think it presages further interest rate rises in the future.
While Asia Development Bank lowers its growth B forecast again, could you tell us why?
I don't think there's any great surprises here. I mean, what they've been saying is seeing, first of all, a global recession, B, the fallout from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think that most importantly, you're looking at countries like China, for example, which are included in that grouping, who, because of their zero COVID policy, have been forced into a kind of lockdown. Now, at the moment, there isn't a great deal of lockdown actually happening within China, but it has actually affected China's growth in the beginning of the year. So that really, all these negative factors really are bringing down the ADB's look at the area, which it was tasked when it was formed 55 years ago to try to develop social equality and also develop economies within that area.
Now, the Bank of Japan is staying loose on their policy. What does it hope to achieve with this?
As it always has, really. I mean, it's been struggling over the past 10 years as a relatively moribund economy. It is the world's third largest economy still, but they're desperate to try to push some life into it, whether that be through consumer spending. Inflation is coming up a little, but the central bank is determined not to join in the general run of tightening in the hope of trying to inject some growth into the economy. And the inflation is rising a little bit there, not perhaps as fast as they would like, but that's the reason that they're keeping it loose at the moment. I think it's what most people expected, and certainly the stock market liked it early this morning.
Micheal, Russia's gas is flowing into Europe again, but for how long this time?
Well, I think that Europe is, particularly Germany, which is the biggest and most dependent upon that gas, is treating all this with a great deal of wariness. Just because the pipeline has opened again as far as gas is concerned, it's only running at 40% of capacity. It may well reduce it. We just do not know. What's pretty clear is that Putin is using it as a weapon against the EU and against Germany in particular, to try to make sure that the energy is rationed and that everyone understands that Russia is where the energy is actually coming from. So I suspect that we're going to see more and more jockeying for position about this. Putin has all the cards at his disposal right now.
And the price cap on Russian oil, will that work?
I think it's I think most people realise that it's not a very clever idea. How can you put a price cap? It's like going into a shop and saying, how much is that? Well, I'm not going to pay for that. I'll pay for this. I'll pay this much for it. And it really doesn't work like that. Added to the fact that Russia is actually selling cut price oil, as far as we know, to India and China. So the whole market just doesn't work like that. Much more encouraging is what the Europeans are doing together and will by the end of the year, which is to forbid insurance on ships actually carrying Russian oil. That's far more constructive, and that'll do far more to bring the price down rather than putting caps on how much people will be prepared to pay for oil. That just simply is not going to work.
Meanwhile, Tesla results prompt a lot of social media chatter. What's the problem?
Well, they did. And I think you mentioned it, it's part of the swapping of Bitcoin for fiat currencies. In other words, for more conventional currencies. It added about $900 million to its balance sheet. A lot of people have been saying this is how Tesla has actually been talking up its company's success. I think that's a bit unfair. I think the earnings per share were actually quite high, number one. Number two, they are getting around some of these delivery problems. And certainly what they've managed to do is to navigate the slowdown, the shutdowns in China, and the fact they've had to rebuild and retool new factories in Texas and Germany. Given those kind of expenses, I have to say I think it's doing rather well. It will need to look to its laurels, though, because the market's for electric vehicles is getting incredibly competitive right now. Everybody seems to be jumping on that particular bandwagon.
And let's move back to the UK, because then there were two, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Now, we know they're going head-to-head to be the next UK Prime Minister. Want to know what your thoughts are on this?
I think that Rishi Sunak certainly has won the day as far as Conservative MPs are concerned, but then again, there are Conservative members of the Conservative Party, 150,000 of them around the country, and they appear to be preferring Liz Truss, as far as we can tell at the moment. So it's going to be a very close contest. I suspect there'll be a lot of bitter words spoken over the summer between these two. It's really got down to this. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think that the one who can show the most consistent cabinet experience, which in this case would be Liz Truss, given her role as Defence Secretary, probably would be a favourite. But who knows? What she's promising, tax cuts, quite how she's going to achieve that, I don't know. It's going to be very, very difficult indeed, because the world, as we know, is turning towards tightening monetary policy rather than tax cuts. Not to say that tax cuts don't encourage growth. Of course they do. You don't get growth through raising interest rates, but it's a question of who actually feels that inflation is the bigger threat rather than lack of growth.
Arise Business Analyst Micheal Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.